So welcome in everyone. My name is Heather Meadows-Adamson. I'm a premium tutor here at Applerouth. Today's presentation is ACT 101. So we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of the test, and then we're really going to deep dive into each section and what the questions are like in each of those sections. So this is, hopefully your student is with you. This is a good one for the student to watch as well. But if not, I believe the recording will be sent, and you can kind of get an idea of what the general feel for the test is like. I am going to have a time for questions at the end, but I just ask that you hold most of your questions until then. Hopefully I answer most of them. And then apologies too, I'm getting over a cold, so I'm a little sniffly. Sorry about that. Let's get started. So let's kind of just to overlook it, right? Let's look at the admissions process in general too and think about how the tests fit in there. So of course you send your high school GPA, right? In context of your schedule strength, right? Like, so are you getting A's in the regular level classes or A's in AP classes, right? And the strength of school. That's also going to add into your SAT, ACT scores, which is also going to combine into things that are more qualitative, like your admissions essays, recommendations, your activities, and demonstrated interest. So the first two pieces, right, those numerical pieces are going to be your academic index, the quantitative components. And the other pieces are the qualitative, right? So really the numbers tell them how they read your application, and the qualitative components are an opportunity to tell a story, to package those numbers together. So just keep in mind that these test numbers aren't everything the school sees. But of course, you know, for a lot of people, for their applications, this is a big portion of that application. So between the two tests, right, structurally, the two tests are pretty identical. They're both going to have reading sections, right? So we see those here. They're both going to have writing and language. So that's writing here and English here. That's like correcting grammar. Both going to have math sections. The biggest differences are that the ACT has a science section. We'll talk about what it looks like, but the SAT does not have that. And then as of 2021, the SAT no longer offers an essay. The ACT still does. It is still optional. And honestly, I pretty much expect any month now for them to say they no longer offer it either. So again, it's pretty rare that you would need to take the ACT essay. So that's something I would just double check with everyone. But again, you wouldn't need to take it unless someone told you to take it. So, but again, for the most part, they're pretty identical. A lot of it is in the presentation of the information, and we're going to talk about the ACT specifically tonight, of course. The amount of time per question is also a big difference. So the SAT does have a more forgiving timing structure, so you're going to get more time per question on the SAT, but it's also a more complicated test too, right? So the ACT, you do have to move fast in some sections, like the reading and the science, but they can be more straightforward in ways that the SAT isn't. So let's dig a little deeper, the English section, right? This is going to be the first section on your ACT. So this section is 45 minutes long, 75 questions, 36 seconds per question. That seems really quick, but this section actually, a lot of students feel pretty comfortable with this one. So just like the SAT writing section, this one features two types of questions, grammar and rhetorical skills. So you're testing your knowledge of English grammar, you're correcting things. And the rhetorical skills questions are where you're kind of deciding what's the best way to say whatever they're trying to say here. These sections are essentially you're editing someone else's essay. This is how they test, you know, your writing skills, by having you edit someone else's paper. Let's look at some examples, right? So here's some grammar questions, right? So questions for the grammar section can cover punctuation, pronoun use, modifiers, verb phrases, prepositions, redundancy, vocab and context, and more, of course. Careful reading and a good knowledge of grammar rules is key here, right? So even though we're only being asked about the small underlined portions for each question, we want to make sure we are reading the whole passage and we're reading the whole sentence for each question as well. Similar to the SAT, the ACT rhetorical skills section asks you to accomplish a given task. That question would look something like this. Given that all choices are true, which choice best uses figurative language to develop ideas from the preceding sentence? So, right, we need to know figurative language. We need to be able to identify that. And we also need to continue to develop the idea from the preceding sentence. That's kind of what this rhetorical skills section means when I mean that. Again, what's the best way to say something? What's the best way to accomplish the task they're giving you? So some overall strategy for that English section, right? There's three major steps. First, look at the answer choices. That helps you identify what concept's being tested, right? If you look at the answer choices and you notice that the only thing changed in between each of them is commas, then we're getting tested on commas, right? Then figure out the error, right? Remember what you know about the specific rule, if it's a grammar rule, right? And make the corrections, right? See, what's the problem here? What's the correct solution I have? Which of these don't work? Eliminate and choose, right? Choose the answer choice that comes closest to accomplishing your correction. Go through each of them and see, okay, does this fix a problem? Yes, but it can cause another problem, right? They could have something else they've changed instead. So the biggest thing is check the choices to see what you're being tested on, and then go from there and make sure you're checking each answer choice for correctness. And always remember to trust your ear in this section, right? If it sounds wrong, it probably is. So for the most part, I'm assuming most of you guys are native English speakers. So again, trust your gut on this one. Also, if everything else is equal, I would recommend picking the shortest answer. That is not an across-the-board recommendation. Do not always pick the shortest answer. But if you are stuck between a couple, the shortest answer is often best. The both tests really highlight clear and concise writing. So the simpler that you can say it, the better. So some examples of things you need to know, right? So here's some examples of some grammar rules you may need to know. So to separate a dependent and an independent clause, you want to use a comma, right? When I got hungry, comma, I made a sandwich. Or you could also separate items on a list with a comma, right? I brought bread, milk, and butter at the store. Two independent clauses, right, which are just two sentences, can be separated with a period. She prepared for the test, period. She studied hard. They can also be connected with a semicolon. Harry made sure he got a good night's sleep, semicolon. It was important to be well rested. The last one, a colon, is a little bit strange. It technically makes an introduction. So we see here, I had one great passion in life, colon, making pizzas. So these are just some examples. Of course, this is not everything, right? But some of the rules that you may want to know, especially in the punctuation realm. And so to study this stuff, there are many different ways to study this. But again, if you're having trouble with the English section on the ACT, this is where I would start by looking at those grammar rules. So here's some more sample questions, right? So if we look, oops, I didn't mean to show you the answer, sorry. So if we look at example one, right? In 1995, divers off the coast of Japan discovered a surprise on the seafloor, circular patterns made of sand. Okay, so if we look here at the answer choices, we see, okay, right? It's clearly a grammar question because pretty much the only thing that's being changed is this punctuation after seafloor, and maybe we add a word, right? So we want to think about independent and dependent clauses, right? So we look at the first sentence, first piece here. In 1995, divers off the coast of Japan discovered a surprise on the seafloor. That's an independent clause. It sounds great on its own, okay? Circular patterns made of sand. That's a dependent clause, right? So you want to think, how do we separate an independent and a dependent clause? We think back to all the rules we know. We can't do it with a semicolon, so we get rid of answer A. We need something to connect them, so we get rid of choice C. And then B, we didn't talk about this, of course. And again, like I said, there's many more rules here, but we do a comma and a conjunction is for two independents. Oops. So that wouldn't work there either. So we end up landing on D here because it is kind of making an introduction like we saw. So again, that's kind of the process you want to go through. I know I'm going super fast with these. We have some example questions for each section tonight. So again, I know I'm going fast, but I just want to get you guys an idea of what kind of working through an ACT is like. So I'm going to clear that. Okay, now we look at this next question, right? So these circles were often over 7 feet in diameter and contained concentric rings and ridges, making them appear much like a target or a landing pad. So if we look here, right, we look at these answers, we see, okay, the only thing we're having to decide about is all these commas. Where do we want commas? Do we want one here? Do we want one here? What about here, right? So we need to think about which one wants. We see we also have the word contain changing a little bit too, but let's focus on the grammar first. So, right, concentric rings and ridges. Rings and ridges are two things. We don't need commas in between those, right? It's not a list. We have to be 3 or more things need to come between that list. So we pop out, we get rid of D, right? Then we want to think, what about this one right here, right? This doesn't really make sense. Why would I separate concentric rings, right? Concentric rings is one idea. We don't really separate it, right? And then these circles were often over 7 feet in diameter and contain concentric rings and ridges. That sounds good. That's independent, making them appear much like a target or a landing pad. That's dependent. So we separate an independent and a dependent with a comma. So we end up picking A here for this question. There we go. Again, I know I'm going so fast. This is not meant to be like a learning seminar, right? This is just meant to show you some processes, how you would work through some questions here on the ACT. Look at this last one. Excuse me. Long sentence. The divers are baffled by their discovery, and although these patterns are short-lived, as currents gradually erode them away, circles will periodically reappear around the region. Okay, the key here, right, is that we have an opening comma for this little phrase, right, as currents gradually erode them away. That's kind of like an aside, right? It's something you can put in parentheses. So if it's something you can put in parentheses, then you want to make sure you're surrounding it with the same thing. Now, we could use a dash if this one up here was also a dash, but it's not, is it? It's a comma. So we need to make these guys match. This one needs to be a comma as well. Right there. So again, right, just kind of thinking about how you work through these. A good knowledge of some grammar rules is a great way to kind of work through these questions one by one. All right, those rhetorical questions, right? So questions about the author's craft can be scary, right? But the key is to read the question carefully, right? We want to focus on this question's specific goal. No matter what else sounds better to you, we have to answer the question. So if we look here, right? Given that all choices are true, which choice emphasizes Germain's innate curiosity, right? So if we look here, looking for amusement, bored to tears. Well, curiosity, probably not bored, right? Scared, probably not scared, right? Okay. Ever thirsty for knowledge. Okay. So looking for amusement, thirsty for knowledge. Now we're stuck between those two, right? Because those are both, at least who's seeking knowledge, right? But curiosity, right? Curiosity is not quite looking for amusement. It is more like wanting to learn more about the world around you, isn't it? So we end up landing on ever thirsty for knowledge here, right? So again, right, no matter what sounds best to us, that's not the decision we're making. The decision we're making is what answers the question here. What is innate curiosity in this sense? Okay, so look at the next one. Given that all choices are true, which choice best uses figurative language to develop ideas in the preceding sentence? Figurative language, I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about in school, right? Metaphor, simile, all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's tons of them, right? So let's kind of look and see what we have. Ideas in the preceding sentence is also important too, right? So, but let's kind of look. Her passion for math could not be extinguished. That's figurative. We'll keep that so far. She continued to learn as she grew up. Not really anything figurative there. Nothing, no imagery or anything. The French Revolution would lead to the rise of Napoleon. Not really figurative. She kept reading many books. Not figurative either, right? The only thing that has any figurative language is going to be choice A, right? Again, her passion being extinguished. That is a figurative language piece. So again, no matter what sounds best, we're answering the question above all. That kind of helps make these a little bit more straightforward at the end of the day. Okay, awesome. So let's dive into the math section. Give me one moment, excuse me. Sorry about that. Like I said, I'm getting over a cold. All right. So the math section is the second one. You have 60 minutes for 60 questions. The formulas are not given to you, but you do have your calculator. So it's a give and take, right? Kind of some examples of a variety of things you'll see. It really is a grab bag of varied math concepts. You can get everything from arithmetic to trigonometry. You'll see a lot of it is Algebra 2, Algebra 1 content. A lot of it is going to be geometry content as well. But you may get things from other places too, right? So like question 40 here is a logic puzzle. Logic puzzles are technically math. So you see kind of, you can get a variety of things in this section. The best thing to do for this section is, of course, review your core stuff, but I really recommend doing some practice tests, especially for the math, to get an idea of all the kind of crazy different kinds of questions you may get asked. So for the content areas. So this is the differences between the two tests, right? So if you look at the two, right, the SAT is really heavily relies on algebra. And of course they have the others as well, but it's really different from the ACT, right? The ACT, the content is much more evenly distributed. You still have about 46% of the questions are algebra based, but that is really a lot of the math you learned in high school anyway. About 23% is geometry. 24% is arithmetic, data analysis, that'd be stats and stuff too. And you have a little bit of trig as well too, right? So again, it really is truly a grab bag. It pulls from all sections of math that you may have been exposed to so far. So, right, let's look at some problems. There's no word problems on the ACT. I'm sorry, there are word problems on the ACT, but they're a little bit shorter than the SAT ones. The SAT is a more reading heavy test in every way. So the ACT, you're more likely to see some more straightforward questions where you see diagrams and geometric figures. So here, right, we get one. You don't get any formulas, remember? So you have to remember your special right triangles, your SOHCAHTOA, that's your trig, and your geometry formulas. A lot of students take geometry their sophomore year nowadays. So if you are a junior or beyond, it probably has been a while. So you want to make sure you freshen up on those. Not knowing the formulas can make or break your math section at the end of the day. You want to make sure you know them, right? And so again, it's a give and take, right? You get to have your calculator the whole time. The SAT, on the other hand, gives you formulas, but you don't get your calculator the whole time. So would you rather do all the stuff by hand, all the calculations, or would you rather have to memorize some formulas? So again, it's a give and take, depends on what your student prefers at the end of the day. So let's look at some examples, right? So step one always is to what's being asked in this math question, right? A ladder leans against a wall shown in the figure below. Ladder is 26 feet long. The base is 24 feet from the wall. How many feet up the wall does it reach? Well, we get a picture too, which is nice. And this is a right triangle question, right? So if it's not a special right triangle, we want to use the Pythagorean theorem. And again, like I said, this is not necessarily supposed to be a teaching webinar. So hopefully your students are listening along and some of this rings a bell, right? We say, okay, we want to do Pythagorean theorem. We write down that formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We know C is 26, that's always the hypotenuse. 24 can be either A or B. Let's pop them in that formula. And then let's calculate. Boom, 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 B is 10, right? We want to check our work, plug it back in if we can, right? Boom, J. There are some special right triangles that makes this question a little bit quicker, but Pythagorean theorem is always reliable as well. All right. So probability, right? This is a little bit interesting. So a bag of mixed nuts contains 9 macadamias, 13 cashews, and 18 peanuts. How many additional cashews must be added so that the probability of randomly drawing a cashew is 2/5? What are we being asked to find? Okay. When we're being asked a question like this, we want to think about focusing on what's not changing, right? Instead of thinking about how to make the cashews 2/5, you can think about how to make all the other nuts 3/5 the total. So let's translate this, right? So the other nuts total is 27, right? It's everything but cashews. So we need to know how many total nuts will make 27 into 3/5 of the total. So this is a good opportunity for proportion. You see that set up here. 27 over whatever that needs to be is 3/5. We cross multiply, solve it, 45. So we need 45 total nuts. So we're not quite done yet, right? Because it's not asking how many total nuts we need. How many more cashews do we need to add, right? So we see, okay, 45 minus 27, 18. There needs to be 18 cashews. We had 13, so we're adding 5, and that's why B is our answer. So a really common mistake in these kinds of questions is to put 45. 45 is not an answer here, but that would be a really easy mistake to make, right? So in a math question, make sure you're always double checking you're answering what they're asking you specifically. Okay, let's look at the reading section. Like I said, I know this is so fast. Hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions at the end too. But again, I'm just giving you a taste of each section, some of the skills you may need. You know, if we're doing something and you're like, oh, that sounds not familiar at all to me, then you know that's something you need to work on. If you're using this webinar as a way to figure out if you want to take the ACT or not, and you're either like, yeah, that makes sense, or I hate that, maybe the SAT is something for you. So kind of think about it like that. The reading section. So the last two sections are the reading and the science, and these are your fast ones. You have 35 minutes for 40 questions, so you get 52 seconds per question, essentially. So it is a sprint. 4 passages with 10 questions each. But one thing about this is, so we'll talk about that in a second. The genres, right? One nice thing is that the students will always see the same 4 genres in the same order. The first one you'll see will be prose fiction, so just a literature piece. Then you'll see social sciences. That's a wide range, including psychology, economics, archaeology, politics. So pretty much something that's not fiction, but not like supernatural science, like chemistry, biology, physics. You'll see humanities. That's about art and artists. It's usually a biography of an artist or the description of a movement, right? So a lot of times you'll see the biography of an author or biography of a painter or something like that. Very common for this section to be biographies. And last, you'll see natural sciences. A natural science is biology, physics, or chemistry for the most part. Those are kind of general. So you'll see a passage about something like that. So those are your 4 categories. It's kind of nice that you know what they are going to be every time. And there is a comparison passage, right? So one of those is comparison. It typically is one of the science ones. So those are a little bit different. Whenever you see the comparison one, you'll know it's comparison. You can tell it's got 2 separate pieces to it. You want to read your first passage using, annotation, things like that. Kind of make sure you're marking up your page as much as you can. Then answer the first few questions that you have, right? Then read the second passage, make notes about similarities and differences, and then answer the rest of the questions. So the strategy for the comparison passages is to treat them as separate passages. It's going to help you get through the questions a little bit better. So this is what I was going to say a moment ago, talking about difficulty, right? So the SAT reading section kind of varies in difficulty. You get spikes in difficulty. This is just a sample example, right? So for example, in the SAT, you could get one passage in the middle that's like from the 1700s that's super tough. And it's really hard to get through. The SAT reading section is 65 minutes long. It's super, super long. It's like a marathon because you get some harder passages. The ACT is a little different, right? We talked about how it's a sprint. It goes quite a bit faster, but the difficulty level is consistent. It really is magazine level reading, stuff you would read National Geographic, Popular Science, right? Nothing too wild. Should be fairly approachable for most students. So the reading is approachable, so you just need to go through it quickly and answer the questions quickly as well. So that's for the reading section. Really, practice helps a lot here, especially if speed is something that your student struggles with. Lastly, the science section. So again, this is the same as the reading, 35 minutes or 40 questions, pretty fast, but a little bit different, right? It's unlike anything you'll see on the SAT. The SAT does have some science mixed into other sections, as we just saw in the reading, but there's no dedicated science section. On the ACT, students must move quickly through passages that have graphs and charts in them. So really what the ACT science section is doing is it's presenting you with an experiment. So it describes the experiment, it shows you some results through charts and graphs, and then it asks you questions about it, like about the results of the experiment. So you aren't expected to understand everything you read. So you get about 6 passages per test. They can come from any field of science, but here are some common areas: biology, physics, chemistry, your typical stuff. Experimental design, by that we're talking about different ways how we set up experiments. The scientific process, right? So the stuff that your student should be familiar with, hypothesis, independent, dependent variables, all that good stuff. They require a little bit of outside knowledge, but like I said, you don't have to know everything. Most of the answers can be found in the passage themselves. So again, passages can feature diagram, charts, graphs, any kind. As with the reading test, speed is key, right? So we want to be able to kind of skim through these easily. There's even a passage where 2 scientists differ on their interpretation, really, really similar to a comparison passage in the reading section. So what is that strategy, right? So, sorry, you can ignore this flipbook section. So the first thing is to stay on the surface. Don't get bogged down by the passages. Let the questions be your guide. So our biggest strategy for the science section is to pretty much skim the passage and go straight to the questions. Again, you aren't expected to know everything in the passage, so we use the questions to guide us. We match the words in the questions to the charts and graphs we're given. So let's kind of try that here. So again, the fact that we can do this question without knowing anything about this background stuff shows you even more so how you don't have to know all of it to go in. At which the following surface temperatures would the luminosity of a star in B be closest to 2 times the luminosity of a star in B, temperature of 3000? Okay, so let's start with the second part, right? A star in galaxy B with a temperature of 3000. Let's go find that first. So we see temperature, right? And we see galaxy B. We're just word matching here, right? I'm looking for 3000, B is the dots, so 1. Okay, so 2 times that would be 2, right? So what temperature would you get a luminosity of 2 in galaxy B? Okay, let's go see. Let's draw a line. And I see about right here. Well, I'd call that about 3300-ish, right? So it's going to be G. Right? And again, the fact that I have no idea what these temperatures are or what anything like that. The fact that we don't need any of that shows you how you don't need the background knowledge here, right? You just need to be able to read the questions, match the words with the graphs and charts you see. So another one. The data in figure 3 best supports which of the following hypotheses? As the surface temperature of a star increases, the size does what? Okay, so surface temperature is down here, right? And size is over here, okay? So surface temperature increases. It goes from 3000 to 4000, so it's increasing this way. What's happening to the size? Well, the size is increasing. It's increasing, but faster, and it's still increasing. So it only increases, right? It increases the whole way. Right? Nothing too crazy, right? Again, we're just word matching. We're just looking at the overall pattern of the graph. This section can be intimidating, and a lot of students kind of get stuck on these, but I think seeing that they're not as crazy as they seem on the surface is really helpful. Okay, so before we get to the Q&A, there's going to be a quick poll put in your chat box. If you guys don't mind filling that out, talks a little bit about you guys and what we can do to help serve you, any other webinars we can provide, things like that. So you'll see a poll in your chat box if you don't mind filling that out really quick. While you do that, I'll remind you that Applerouth has quite a few services we offer. We offer SAT and ACT prep, online, one-on-one, groups, all kinds of stuff. We also offer prep for AP classes, high school subject assistance, and elementary and middle school too, and general study skills. So lots of different services we offer here. All right, and then once you guys finish that poll, I'm happy to take some questions. So feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function in the chat, or in the Q&A box, sorry. And again, I'm happy to talk about anything about the ACT, strategies, things like that. Scoring, all that good stuff, study strategies. If you have larger questions about testing or the SAT as well, I'm also happy to answer those too. Right, so while you guys are thinking, I'll kind of talk about some typical questions I get. Typical question I get is, when do I start taking the test, right? So something that's really important is, I mentioned earlier, Algebra 2 is on both tests heavily, right? So what you want to do is you want to And you want to think about when your student's taking Algebra 2. If they took Algebra 2 as a sophomore, then you can start testing anytime junior year. If they're taking Algebra 2 as a junior, you want to start testing spring of junior year. Because again, you want as much of that class under your belt as possible. That's a good way to think about it. And a good rule to remember is that you can take multiple tests. Super scoring is super helpful, right? So super scoring is where a school takes your best of scores from different test dates. So let's look at some examples. So let's say you take the ACT in June. Let's say you get a 25 on your English, a 30 on your math, you killed it. You get a 24 on your reading, and you get a 26 on your science. Okay. Take it again in July, you get a 26 in your English, you get a 29 in your math, 25 in your reading, and a 27 in your science. What this is going to do, super scoring, is it's going to pick your best score from each section and combine those. So when colleges see your score, they're going to see this score highlighted in purple right here. They're just going to see a 26, 30, 25, 27. And then your composite is an average of those numbers. So I can calculate that really quick. You get a 27 composite. That's kind of, people say like, I got a 28. That's like their general composite score. So just keep that in mind. That's something that's really good, super scoring. So you want to make sure you take whatever test you do end up taking more than once, because it's going to help you in the long run. All right, does anyone have any questions? I'm happy to answer any. If you guys don't have any questions, y'all are free to go, of course, but I'll stick around for a little bit more to see if anyone does have any. I'm happy to answer them. All right, well, if you guys don't have any questions, I will let you have some of your evening back. Thanks for joining us. So again, this is just an ACT 101 session, kind of generally talking about what the feel of the ACT is, what kind of stuff it covers. If you guys are looking for something more of an overview, kind of differences between the two tests, but also how the tests roll into your admissions process, I recommend signing up for one of our other webinars. We offer some, called Navigating the College Admissions Process, SAT versus ACT, all kinds of stuff like that, test optional. So we offer a lot of different webinars that kind of dive into different topics. So if you feel like you have more questions about other things, definitely sign up with us. They are all free, and we are happy to help you guys in any way. But like I said, if no one has any questions, then y'all are free to go for the evening. And thanks again for joining us.